Speaking, we're here with Dr. Prakash Nagarkatti. Did I say that right?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. So he's the Vice President of Research at the University of South Carolina.
Right.
So one of the things that I just was at his presentation. You had some really amazing things talking about THC, CBD research. You've published a lot of papers in some very reputable organizations and publications. But before that, so always curious, how did you get to, or how did you decide out of this whole scope of what I can do with my skill set of research, how you got into the cannabinoid research?
Right, so basically I'm a trained immunologist, so I look at the immune cells. But when I was a professor at the Medical College of Virginia, I joined Medical College of Virginia in year 2000. And there was a lot of research that was going on with THC and the psychotropic effects and all that. And at one of the seminars I heard that they just discovered that the immune cells express a unique type of cannabinoid receptor called CB2, which is not expressed in the brain. So that immediately caught my attention, and I was like, okay, what are these receptors doing on the immune cells? Are the immune cells producing endocannabinoids, and what way would they be regulating inflammation? And so we started doing research. We got a grant from NIH to do that research, and we got some really exciting results to show that the cannabinoids can suppress inflammation and therefore regulate the immune functions or regulate inflammation. But also we were able to then extend that observation to cancers. That is, when the cancer cells originate from the immune system or the immune cells, those cells continue to express these cannabinoid receptors, and therefore then we can kill those cancer cells using the cannabinoids. So, and we published that in a very highly cited journal called Blood, and that caught attention of scientists and people all over the world.
Yeah. So. You mentioned that there's a PBS special on. Is it on your lab?
Yes, so there was, after that, PBS made a documentary on clearing the smoke. It's a 1-hour documentary, and they contacted our lab, and they came to our lab to film all the research that we are doing. Yeah. So out of that 1-hour documentary, I think almost 20 minutes they covered our research on cannabinoids and cancer. So that's one of the we were one of the pioneers in demonstrating how cannabinoids can suppress inflammation as well as cancer.
Okay, yeah, I'll put a link to that in the description. Right. I think that'd be really cool. I haven't seen it, so I'll be sure to watch it.
Yeah, it's really nice.
So then, let's see, with I'm sure you understand the industry right now. There are a lot of competing forces, with government and people that want to get into the business of hemp and cannabis, and then of course the users, right? The people that can really benefit from it. From your perspective, just how do you see it right now?
Yeah, it's a very complex problem that we are dealing because there are so many federal agencies involved, including DEA and FDA and NIH, and the states are involved. There is this farm bill, and then there are people who are wanting to produce these various compounds that could have benefit to the people, and then there are these consumers who are looking at because there are, as I said, there are millions of people who are suffering from inflammatory diseases and autoimmune diseases against which there is no cure. So these are like debilitating diseases, and they are looking for alternative sources of medicine or complementary and alternative medicine. And suddenly they realize that there is some significant evidence presented by the scientists that these could help them, and so they are seeking the help from the government, saying either you help us secure these, or we want to try to see whether we can try it out and see whether we can get relief from these things. So it's a complex problem. When a natural product that is found in a plant, or what Mother Nature has created, has certain things which might have really potential tremendous health benefits, And then the question, of course, from the government side is, how do you regulate it? How do you make it safe? How do you make sure that, people really get the benefits at the same time they do not suffer from, any toxic effects or whatever. So I can understand from both angles, the complexities of these problems.
Yeah, but obviously it makes your job a little bit more, or a lot more difficult. Because I would imagine that you want to research other areas that maybe you cannot. Is that
right? So from the scientist perspective or researcher perspective, I think the biggest challenge is the fact that these compounds have been, scheduled as, considered as Schedule 1 drugs, and which means that, we have to be very careful in how do you store, how do you monitor, how do you, especially doing clinical trials, it becomes really complex. So that's the issue that most researchers are facing right now, because that these compounds are classified under Schedule 1.
Right.
But if they were in some other type of schedule or less restricted, then that would have been more like we would have had more ability to do research on these compounds. So.
Okay. So you've researched some pretty interesting topics within the space. If you had no limitations, what would you love to research? If there were no laws or nothing preventing you, or maybe technology, what would you start researching tomorrow?
That's a great question. I think we would like to know precisely, what type of cells produce endocannabinoids. How do they help, regulate immune system homeostasis, or how do they work to make sure that we are, not suffering from any diseases, or how do they maintain our health? So a lot of things, even the marijuana, THC and CBD have brought attention to, are these compounds produced within our own system, right? But it'll be nice to know, okay, these endocannabinoids that are being produced, what kind of role do they have? How can we regulate them? Can we regulate them within our system that we don't have to depend on marijuana cannabinoids, So those are some really fascinating things, especially the fact that the cannabinoids, both marijuana cannabinoids or endocannabinoids that we produce, can regulate a wide array of physiological functions, from memory to appetite to immune functions to thermoregulation, and you name it, and there is a role for endocannabinoids, there is a role for cannabinoids. So the question is, can we continue to do research on plant-derived cannabinoids, or can we also start working on our own endocannabinoids and how we can regulate them and understand the mechanisms?
Yeah, I attended a seminar in New Orleans a couple of months ago, and there was someone, I forget the gentleman's name, but he was doing research on or starting a company to essentially create CBD and other cannabinoids in the lab, as opposed to just grown outdoors.
Right.
And it's very interesting. His point was that with pharma, they don't go to the field; they grow it in the lab through via fungus. I think he mentioned.
Yes.
I thought that was interesting. And
so there's a lot of research. That's a great point. So the question, of course, is going to be: is pure THC and CBD as effective as the oil extracted from the cannabis plant? Because the cannabis plant has over 400 chemicals and over 60 cannabinoids. So there is a possibility that THC along with CBD and the other cannabinoid cousins that are found in the cannabis plant might have what is called as the entourage effect that might promote the activity of THC and CBD. So again, we need to do all that research to see whether pure THC and CBD are they as effective as when they're found separately and isolated versus when they're found along with all their cousins that are found in the cannabis plant.
Okay. So during your presentation, you mentioned quite a few things, not necessarily summarizing all your research, but just some of the high points of what you found. Can you talk a little bit about some of those high points?
Right. So we were able to show that that immune cells express these cannabinoid CB2 receptors, and therefore when you add the cannabinoids, they can induce not only sometimes they can kill those activated T cells, activated immune cells, but also some of these cancers that express the cannabinoid receptors can also get killed. And we're also able to show that when you are exposed to certain bacterial toxins like Staphylococcal enterotoxin B, which is considered to be one of the most potent toxins, and when you're hospitalized and you get infection with this, there's production of these Staphylococcal enterotoxin B, and that can cause hyperactivation of the immune system, and it can shut down all the organs. And we found that THC can completely suppress that, and in animals that are treated with these toxins, 100% of them die, but when you treat them with THC, 100% of them survive. So that's truly fascinating for me to show that that these are such potent cannabinoids, are such potent anti-inflammatory, potentially anti-inflammatory drugs. And we are able to show that in a variety of autoimmune disease models, whether it's multiple sclerosis, whether it's autoimmune hepatitis, whether it's colitis, and so it goes to demonstrate that potentially they have useful beneficial effects against a wide array of autoimmune diseases. The other thing that we have recently been able to show is that the cannabinoids can change your gut microbiota. Right now it's considered that the gut microbiota, there are trillions of bacteria that are found in your gut, which are responsible for deciding whether you're going to get become more susceptible to autoimmune disease, or whether you're going to have healthy lives, or whether you become a lean individual or an obese individual. All of those things are triggered by or regulated by your gut microbiome. And we're able to show that, interestingly, that these cannabinoids have beneficial effects on your gut microbiome, and that may be the reason how they're preventing the autoimmune diseases from developing as well. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. The image that I got when you were talking about the staph infections is you go to the hospital, they fill your chart, and you get, I don't know, like an IV, and like here's your bed and all that, and then like here's your CBD dosage or something like that. Like that's just while if that's possible, right? Just considering where we are today, where especially in the medical profession is not necessarily against it, but they're waiting for someone like you to say, like, here's this double-blind study, and here's what we've concluded, before being able to say, okay, patient John Smith, here's your dosage for this condition. It seems like we're still, even though anecdotally everyone's saying, oh, here's how it's helped me, but we don't have that science to back it up. For the government at least to take action and say, yeah, go ahead and provide it for that.
Yeah, but sometimes that's a great point. But sometimes anecdotal evidence gives rise to clinical trials and drugs being approved. And I can give you the best example is children with epilepsy. Right, there are certain forms of epilepsy which currently don't have any type of treatments available. And these children used to have like several hundred times, seizures in a day. And somebody said, marijuana helps, or medical cannabis helps, and the parents tried, and they found it was like a miracle that their seizures completely disappeared, right? And that became an anecdotal evidence that everybody started talking about it. Then there was a pharmaceutical company that did clinical trials and found that yes, it does work, and then FDA approved that. So sometimes anecdotal evidence is also necessary for the pharmaceutical companies or the FDA to ultimately come to clinical trials and get approval for that. So right now there is a lot of anecdotal evidence, and I think we need to translate that into more research and more clinical trials, so that FDA can approve that, and then people can get benefited by that.
Yeah. Okay. So last question: do you have an ask, for anybody watching this, or a request, or anything that you want people to do, whether that's to find out more about you or about your research? What would that be?
Right. So again, people need to be very careful in terms of what kind of research is being done. So I think people need to educate themselves about cannabinoids, and if they're interested in looking at all of our research, they can go to a website it's a government website called PubMed. Okay. And once you have the PubMed, you can search our literature as well as the research done by other people. Our research, if you put just Nagarkatti, and it'll show you, hundreds of papers that we have published on cannabinoids as well as other areas of information.
Okay.
And that would be the best way to get to know, how these cannabinoids act, what kind of disease they act on, what are the mechanisms they act through, and all that.
Okay, great. I will put that link in the description. And thank you so much for your work again, and thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks for the
You're a busy man.
opportunity. Okay.
So I will.